It had been a long week for Maria. A teacher by profession, she had just finished a series of training workshops in the city. Though the workshops were helpful, they had drained her energy. Now, on her way back home, all she could think about was relaxing in the comfort of her small apartment, spending time with her loved ones and just unwinding from the nonstop hustle of the past few days. The airport was crowded, as it often was, with people rushing to get to their gates or grab a quick coffee before their flights. Maria, however, had already checked in and was ready to board the flight that would take her back to her quiet little town. She wasn't in a hurry. There was no rush for her. As she sat in the waiting area, she caught glimpses of people hurrying past, each with their own story, their own destination. It was a reminder of how busy the world could be and how, in contrast, she longed for simplicity and peace. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, Maria gathered her things and joined the line. She could already picture herself on the plane, relaxing with her favorite book, maybe even falling asleep for the entire flight. She had always loved flying. The sensation of being up in the sky surrounded by clouds always gave her a sense of freedom. It was a brief escape from the routine of everyday life. Once on the plane, Maria found her seat by the window, settled into the cozy nook, and let out a sigh of relief. The seatbelt sign was still on and the plane was taxiing to the runway. It was a routine she had gotten used to over the years, waiting for the plane to take off, watching the ground get smaller and smaller as they ascended into the clouds. But today, something felt a little different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the week, or maybe it was the simple joy of being able to go home. The flight attendants began their usual pre-flight safety demonstration, but Maria was distracted. She glanced around the cabin, noting the usual mix of passengers, families, business people, and tourists. She didn't pay much attention to anyone in particular until a sudden noise broke her from her thoughts. A baby's cries echoed through the cabin. At first, it wasn't too loud, but then as the minutes passed, the crying grew more intense. It wasn't just a whimper here and there. It was the kind of crying that made everyone in the cabin aware of it. Maria could hear the mother trying to calm the child, speaking softly, trying to soothe the baby with comforting words, but the crying only seemed to get louder, the little one's distress filling the entire space. Maria couldn't help but feel sympathy for the mother. She knew how difficult it could be to calm a crying child, especially on a plane. The confined space, the strange surroundings, and the unfamiliar sounds, everything could make a child feel even more upset. Maria, however, was in a bit of a dilemma. She was exhausted too, and the constant crying was starting to wear on her nerves. She glanced over to where the mother was seated, trying to catch her eye. The woman, who looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, had a look of helplessness on her face. Her attempts to comfort the child weren't working. She was clearly struggling, trying every trick in the book to quiet the little one, but nothing was working. The father seated beside her was doing what he could. He gently patted the baby's back, but he too seemed at a loss. Maria sat in her seat, uncertain for a moment. Should she offer help? Would they even want it? She wasn't sure. But then something inside her stirred. She knew she had to do something. It was just in her nature to help. She had spent her career working with children, helping them learn and grow, always eager to offer support whenever she could. This felt no different. With a quiet sigh, Maria stood up from her seat and walked toward the mother and child. As she approached, the mother looked up at her, clearly frazzled, but also relieved to see someone offer a friendly gesture. "Hi," Maria said softly, her voice calm. "I don't mean to intrude, but would you mind if I tried to sing to him? I used to work with children, and sometimes a lullaby helps calm them down." The mother hesitated for a moment, but then nodded gratefully. "Please, if you think it will help. I've tried everything I can, but nothing seems to work." Maria gave her a reassuring smile and gently moved closer to the child. The baby, a little boy, was wailing loudly, his tiny fists clenched in frustration. His red face was twisted in distress, and his eyes were squeezed shut as if he was overwhelmed by the noise of the plane and the unfamiliar environment. Maria, though, wasn't worried. She knew how soothing music could be for children. She had seen it countless times in her work, how a familiar tune could quiet even the most upset child. She began to hum a gentle lullaby, one that her mother used to sing to her when she was little. It was a soft, calming melody, simple and sweet, with no complex notes or rhythms, just a song meant to soothe and comfort. As she sang, the baby's crying slowly started to fade. At first, it was barely noticeable, but after a few moments, Maria could see the baby's tense muscles begin to relax. His crying turned into soft whimpers, and then, finally, silence. The mother let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "I didn't think anything would work." Maria smiled warmly, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. The baby had stopped crying, and she could see him now, his eyes fluttering as he slowly drifted off to sleep in his mother's arms. The cabin was quieter now, the atmosphere much more relaxed. She stepped back, giving the family some space, and returned to her seat. The whole cabin seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The soft lullaby had worked wonders. As Maria settled back into her seat, she glanced over at the father, who had been watching the whole scene with quiet interest. He gave her a small, appreciative nod, acknowledging her kindness. Maria smiled politely and nodded back, not thinking much of it. It wasn't about recognition for her. It was simply the right thing to do. The plane was now cruising comfortably in the air. The chaos of the crying child had subsided, and everything seemed to calm down. People were starting to settle in for the rest of the flight. Some were reading, others were watching movies or chatting quietly. Maria pulled out her book and began to read, grateful for the peace that had returned. But the moment with the child stayed with her. There was something about it that felt different from the usual kindness she extended. The mother and father seemed so grateful, and the baby's peaceful sleep was a small victory in her day. It made her realize once again how much she loved helping people, even in the smallest of ways. It didn't matter whether it was a crying baby on a plane or a child in her classroom. Every small act of kindness counted. Maria smiled to herself, feeling a warmth in her chest. She was tired, yes, but this brief moment of connection had made the long flight worth it. She could only hope that the rest of the journey would be as calm as the baby now sleeping soundly in his mother's arms. And little did she know, that moment of kindness would lead her to an encounter that would change her life forever. As the plane continued its journey through the sky, the gentle hum of the engines became a backdrop to the calm that had settled in the cabin. Maria leaned back in her seat, her book resting in her lap, though her mind was still partly with the family she had just helped. She could still see the grateful smile of the mother and hear the soft breathing of the baby who had fallen asleep in her arms. The peaceful atmosphere on the plane now felt like a small victory. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relaxation of the flight wash over her. She had always found a certain peace in the air, away from the noise and stress of everyday life. It was almost as if time slowed down, offering her a brief escape. But as she drifted into her thoughts, she noticed someone approaching her. It was the father of the child. He had stood up from his seat, moving toward her with a look of appreciation on his face. Maria, a bit surprised but curious, looked up at him as he stopped by her row. "Excuse me," he said with a friendly, though somewhat formal smile. "I just wanted to thank you again for what you did for our son. You really helped us out. It's been a long flight, and we were starting to get really stressed out. It means a lot to us." Maria smiled modestly, feeling a little awkward. "Oh, it's nothing," she replied. "I'm just glad he's calm now. Babies can get upset easily, especially with all the noise and unfamiliar surroundings." The man chuckled softly, his tone warm. "It's true. It's a lot for them to handle. But you really helped us out when we were at our wits' end. My wife and I were struggling, and we didn't know what else to do." Maria nodded, understanding completely. She could see the exhaustion in both their eyes, a kind of fatigue that came not just from traveling, but from the constant demands of parenting. She didn't know what it was like to be a parent herself, but she had seen firsthand how much love and patience it took. The man's expression softened, and he glanced at his wife, who was still holding their sleeping child. "I never expected someone to step in like that. It's rare to see people helping out in situations like this, especially on a crowded plane." Maria shrugged, not thinking much of it. "I guess it's just in my nature to help when I can." The man seemed genuinely interested, and after a brief pause he asked, "So, what do you do for a living?" "I'm a teacher," Maria answered. "I work at a small school back home. I help kids with learning disabilities mostly. It's not always easy, but it's rewarding." "That sounds wonderful," the man replied, his voice sincere. "It must take a lot of patience and care to work with children like that." Maria smiled, feeling a bit of pride in her work. It does, but it's worth it. Seeing a child make progress, no matter how small, is a feeling that never gets old. The man nodded, and for a moment they both stood there in comfortable silence. The airplane's engines hummed on, and the cabin around them was peaceful, as most passengers had settled into their own routines for the rest of the flight. Maria glanced back at her seat and saw that her book had slipped to the floor, but she didn't feel like picking it up right away. Instead, she was content to stand here and talk with the man, a fellow passenger on a shared journey. "You know, it's rare to meet someone so dedicated to their work," the man said, his voice thoughtful. "You're doing important work, helping kids find their way in the world. I really admire that." Maria felt a little embarrassed by the compliment, but was also touched. "Thank you," she said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I just do my best." He gave her a small, appreciative smile before continuing. "It's not often I meet someone like you. Most of the people I interact with are in my business world. People with big jobs, big titles, all wrapped up in their success. But you're grounded. It's refreshing." Maria, a bit taken aback, wasn't sure what to say to that. She wasn't used to being praised for her simplicity. "Well, I guess I've always tried to keep things simple. Life's complicated enough already, don't you think?" He smiled again, and for the first time, Maria noticed the quiet confidence in his demeanor. He wasn't just any ordinary businessman. There was something more to him, a certain calm that came from years of experience, of navigating the world on his own terms. "I agree," he said thoughtfully. "Simplicity is often the key to happiness. But it's not something that everyone appreciates, especially in my line of work." Maria, curious now, tilted her head slightly. "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" The man's smile deepened, but he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he glanced down at his watch, then back at her, considering his response. "I'm in business," he said after a moment. "A lot of people might describe me as an entrepreneur, but that doesn't quite capture what I do. I run a number of companies, mostly in technology and finance. I've been fortunate enough to have built a few successful businesses over the years." Maria nodded, impressed but not entirely understanding the magnitude of his success. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," she said, her voice reflecting a mixture of admiration and curiosity. The man smiled, his eyes lighting up with a touch of pride. "It is, but it's also rewarding in its own way. Though I must admit, sometimes the work can feel a little distant. It's easy to get caught up in numbers, in profits, in the chase for more success. And I've realized over time that, while those things are important, they don't necessarily bring happiness. That's something I'm still learning." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "I can imagine. It must be hard to balance it all, especially when you have a family, too." His gaze softened as he looked over at his wife, who was still cradling the baby. "Family is everything," he said quietly. "Without them, none of this would matter." Maria smiled. She could sense the sincerity in his words, and for the first time, she truly felt the weight of his success. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man who cared deeply about his family, his work, and the impact he made in the world. It was easy to see that his success had come at a cost, but he didn't seem to regret it. Instead, he seemed to be searching for something more, something beyond the business world. They continued talking for a little while longer, sharing small anecdotes about their lives. Maria told him a little more about her work as a teacher, while he spoke about the challenges of balancing his professional and personal lives. Despite their differences in careers, they found common ground in their shared values of family, hard work, and the importance of finding meaning in their lives. Eventually, the conversation wound down and the man politely excused himself, returning to his seat next to his wife. Maria sat back down as well, feeling a sense of satisfaction from the unexpected conversation. It wasn't often she spoke so openly with strangers, especially on a plane, but there was something about this man that made her feel comfortable, as if they had known each other longer than they really had. As she resumed reading her book, she couldn't help but think about the conversation they had just had. The man had been kind and thoughtful, but there was something more to him than just his wealth. There was depth, a complexity that she couldn't quite put into words. She felt a sense of curiosity about him, but at the same time she knew that she had no right to ask too many questions. He was just another passenger on a plane after all, just like her. But even as the flight continued, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this brief interaction had been more than just a simple conversation. It was a reminder that sometimes the people we meet in passing can have a lasting impact on our lives. And sometimes the smallest gestures, like singing a lullaby to a crying baby, can lead to connections that change everything. As the flight continued, Maria found herself lost in her thoughts, her mind replaying the conversation she had just had with the man. There was something about him that intrigued her. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. He wasn't like the other business people she had met in her life. There was a depth to him, something beyond his wealth and success. He spoke with sincerity, but there was also a quiet humility about him, despite his obvious achievements. It made her curious, though she tried not to dwell too much on it. Maria leaned back in her seat and glanced out the window. The clouds were thick and the sky had turned a soft shade of blue as the plane soared higher into the air. She tried to return to her book, but her mind kept wandering. She had never been one to strike up conversations with strangers, especially on a plane, but there was something different about this encounter. It wasn't just about the momentary kindness of singing to the baby. It was the unexpected connection that followed. Meanwhile, the man had returned to his seat next to his wife. Maria could see the two of them in her peripheral vision, their faces now relaxed as they quietly conversed, the baby still resting peacefully in his mother's arms. The whole scene gave off a sense of calm, a kind of serenity that contrasted with the turbulence of everyday life. A few minutes passed, and Maria found herself glancing back at the man, who was now looking out the window deep in thought. Something about his quiet demeanor caught her attention. He wasn't like the typical businessman who spent the entire flight working or staring at a screen. Instead, he seemed reflective, almost lost in thought, as if he was processing something far beyond the usual concerns of the business world. She couldn't help herself. Curiosity got the better of her, and without thinking too much about it, she stood up and walked over to his seat. "Hey, is everything okay?" Maria asked, her voice gentle, not wanting to intrude too much. He turned toward her, his eyes momentarily surprised by her question, but then he gave her a soft smile. "Oh yeah, just thinking, I guess." Maria sat down in the seat next to him, feeling a little nervous now, but still intrigued. "Thinking about what?" she asked, her tone casual but genuine. The man paused for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You know, just life," he said quietly. "All the things I've worked for, all the success. Sometimes I wonder if it's really worth it, you know?" Maria tilted her head slightly, not expecting such a deep response. "I can understand that," she said after a pause. "I think we all have moments where we question what we're doing, or if what we're working towards is really meaningful." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. I've built a lot over the years, but sometimes I feel like I've lost touch with what really matters. I think about the time I've spent away from my family, the hours spent in meetings or on calls, and I wonder if I've sacrificed too much in the name of success." Maria listened quietly, understanding the weight of his words. It's hard to balance it all, isn't it? We get caught up in work and responsibilities, but at the end of the day, it's the people we care about that matter the most. The man looked at her with a mix of gratitude and appreciation. "I didn't expect to be having a conversation like this today," he said with a small chuckle. "But you're right. I've spent so much time building my career, but I've also missed out on things that are more important, like being present for my family, being there for the people I care about." Maria smiled softly. "I think we all get lost in the grind sometimes. It's easy to forget what truly matters when we're focused on what's in front of us, but you're not alone in that." For a few moments, they both sat in silence, the hum of the plane providing a gentle backdrop to their conversation. Maria felt an odd sense of peace in the quiet, as if this simple exchange had created a deeper connection between them. Finally, the man spoke again, his voice more reflective this time. "I admire what you do, you know? Working with kids, helping them learn. It sounds so fulfilling, so grounded." Maria blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. It is fulfilling in its own way. I love being able to make a difference, even if it's just in one child's life. But, you know, it's not always easy. Sometimes it feels like I'm barely making a dent in the bigger picture." He looked at her, his eyes sincere. "I get that. It's hard to see the impact when you're in the middle of it all. But believe me, what you do matters. You're shaping lives, helping children discover their potential. That's something incredibly valuable." Maria felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She had never really thought about her work in such grand terms, but hearing someone else acknowledge it that way made her appreciate it in a new light. "You really think so?" she asked, her voice soft. "I do," he said, his gaze steady. "It's not always about the big, flashy successes. Sometimes the small things, like teaching a child to believe in themselves or showing them they have the ability to succeed, those are the moments that really count." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of pride in her work. "I guess when you put it that way, it makes it feel a little more worthwhile." The man returned her smile, his expression thoughtful. "It's all about perspective, isn't it? We get so caught up in the hustle of life that we forget to stop and appreciate the little victories. Sometimes it's the small things that make the biggest difference." Maria nodded in agreement. She had spent so much of her time focused on what was next, preparing lessons, attending workshops, staying up late to finish grading papers, that she had almost forgotten the real reason she loved teaching. It wasn't about the accolades or recognition. It was about those moments when a child finally understood something they'd been struggling with, or when a shy student suddenly gained confidence and spoke up in class. Those were the moments that made all the hard work worth it. The conversation shifted, and for the next hour or so, they continued to talk. The man, whose name Maria still didn't know, shared more about his life, his struggles with balancing work and family, his desire to make a positive impact, and the constant tension between success and personal fulfillment. Maria listened intently, offering her own thoughts and experiences when appropriate. As the plane began its descent, the mood shifted slightly. There was a sense of quiet satisfaction in the air, as if the conversation had somehow helped both of them find a bit of clarity. The man seemed less burdened, more at peace with himself, and Maria felt a strange sense of connection with him, despite the fact that they had only known each other for a few hours. Before long, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they would be landing shortly. The man turned to Maria, offering her a final smile. "I'm really glad we talked," he said earnestly. "It's not every day you meet someone who reminds you of what really matters." Maria smiled back, feeling the warmth of his words. "I'm glad we talked too. It's not often you meet someone who really makes you think." With that, the plane touched down smoothly and the passengers began to prepare for their arrival. But as Maria gathered her things, she couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter had meant something more than just a brief conversation. She didn't know exactly how, but she sensed that this meeting had opened the door to something new, something unexpected. And as she left the plane, she couldn't help but wonder what would come of this strange but meaningful connection. The days following the flight passed by quickly for Maria. She went back to her usual routine, teaching, planning lessons, and enjoying the quiet of her small town. She tried not to think too much about the conversation she had with the man on the plane. It had been an unexpected exchange, but she didn't want to make too much of it. After all, he was just another passenger she had shared a flight with. Still, something lingered in her mind, a feeling that this brief interaction might have meant more than she realized. Several days later, as she was preparing for a new lesson at school, Maria's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She wasn't one to answer numbers she didn't recognize, but something about this one made her pause. It felt oddly familiar, like a part of her life she hadn't quite let go of. With a quick breath, she answered the call. "Hello? Hello, is this Maria?" A voice on the other end was warm but professional. It had a slight edge of formality, but it was also polite and respectful. "Yes, this is Maria. Who's this?" She felt a sudden curiosity rise in her chest. "This is Jake. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Foster. He's the man you spoke with on the flight last week. Do you remember him?" Maria blinked, caught off guard. "Mr. Foster?" She instantly recognized the name. The businessman who had been traveling with his family, the one she had sung a lullaby to. She'd almost forgotten his name, but hearing it now brought back the memory of their conversation. "Oh yes, I remember him," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "How can I help?" "Well, Mr. Foster asked me to reach out to you," Jake continued. "He was really impressed with your kindness on the flight, and after thinking about it, he wanted to offer you something. A kind of thank you for the way you helped his family." Maria felt a flutter in her chest. She hadn't expected anything like this. She had simply done something kind without expecting any reward. And now here she was, receiving a call from someone acting on behalf of this successful businessman. "What do you mean?" Maria asked, her curiosity growing. Jake explained in a calm and professional tone. "Mr. Foster runs several charitable organizations, and after your conversation with him on the plane, he thought you might be a good fit for one of his projects. He wants to support your work in any way he can. He believes that the work you do with children is incredibly important, and he's willing to make a donation to your school or provide resources to help you further your efforts. Maria was speechless for a moment, processing what she had just heard. She had always believed in the power of helping others, but she had never imagined that a single conversation could lead to such an offer. "Wow," she finally said, her voice filled with disbelief. "That's very generous of him. But I don't know if I can accept something like that. I didn't do what I did for any kind of reward." Jake's tone softened, as if he understood her hesitation. "Mr. Foster knows that, but he also wants to support people who make a difference in the world. He believes that what you're doing is something that deserves recognition and assistance. He wants to help you do even more with the work you're already doing." Maria felt conflicted. She had always been someone who valued simplicity and humility. She didn't seek recognition or rewards for helping others. It was enough to know that she had made a difference in someone's life. But now with this offer in front of her, she wasn't sure what to do. "I really appreciate the offer," Maria said slowly, her mind racing. "But I don't want to feel like I'm taking advantage of him or his generosity," Jake reassured her. "I understand your hesitation, but think of it as an opportunity to reach more children, to have a greater impact. Mr. Foster wants to make sure that your work continues to thrive, and if there's anything he can do to help, he's happy to provide it." Maria thought for a moment. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. On one hand, this could be a chance to provide better resources for her students, to offer them opportunities that might otherwise be out of reach. On the other hand, she didn't want to be seen as someone who took advantage of other people's kindness. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready to accept something like this just yet." "That's completely understandable," Jake replied. "Take your time. But just know that the offer is there, and if you decide you want to move forward, we'll be here to help." With that, the conversation ended. Maria hung up the phone, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She felt grateful for the offer, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to accept such generosity. It wasn't about the money or the resources. It was about the feeling of being worthy of such a gesture. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and this felt like a step outside her comfort zone. Over the next few days, Maria found herself thinking about the call often. She talked it over with a few friends and family members, trying to get their perspective. Most of them encouraged her to accept the offer, reminding her that it wasn't about personal gain. It was about the students she served and the impact she could make with the help of additional resources. Still, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into unfamiliar territory. She wasn't used to receiving help, especially from someone she had met only briefly. It felt like a strange turn of events, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the potential for good that could come from this. After much thought and internal debate, Maria decided to call Jake back. She knew that she couldn't let this opportunity slip by, especially if it meant she could do more for her students. "Hello, Jake. It's Maria. I've thought about your offer and I'm willing to accept it," she said, her voice steady but filled with a sense of resolution. Jake's voice brightened on the other end of the line. "That's wonderful to hear, Maria. Mr. Foster will be thrilled. He believes in what you're doing, and he's excited to help in any way he can." Over the next few weeks, the details were worked out. Mr. Foster's team helped arrange for a significant donation to the school, as well as resources that would allow Maria to expand her work with children who had learning difficulties. There were new books, tools for interactive learning, and even opportunities for professional development that would help her become an even better teacher. It was everything she had dreamed of, but never thought she could achieve on her own. As the donation and resources arrived, Maria felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. She couldn't believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. What had started as a simple act of kindness, singing a lullaby to a crying child, had turned into an opportunity to transform her students' lives. It wasn't just the material resources that mattered, though. What truly touched Maria was the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. Mr. Foster had seen something in her work, something that mattered beyond his wealth and success. It wasn't just about helping her financially. It was about empowering her to continue doing what she loved, in a way that would make a lasting difference. Maria knew that this was just the beginning. She still had a lot of work to do and there would be challenges ahead. But she also knew that with this new support, she had the chance to make a real impact, and that was all that mattered to her. In the weeks that followed, Maria's classroom became a place of even greater possibility. She saw the students she worked with begin to flourish, their confidence growing as they had access to better tools and resources. Maria herself felt more energized and focused, knowing that she had the support she needed to continue her mission. As for Mr. Foster, she never saw him again, but she thought of him often. She thought of the quiet businessman on the plane, who had recognized something in her, a simple act of kindness, and had made it possible for her to do even more. She didn't know his full story, nor did she need to, but she would always be grateful for the chance encounter that had changed her life in ways she could never have imagined. Months passed, and Maria's life began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. The support from Mr. Foster, the businessman she had met on the plane, had opened doors for her that she never thought possible. What started as a simple act of kindness had snowballed into a series of opportunities that had allowed her to make a bigger impact in her community. The resources she had received, new educational materials, tools for interactive learning, and the generous donation to her school had transformed her classroom. Her students were thriving in ways she hadn't seen before. They were more engaged, more confident, and even the ones who had once struggled were now showing remarkable progress. Maria couldn't help but smile every time she walked into the classroom, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment that came from knowing she was helping her students grow and succeed. But even as things were going so well, Maria couldn't forget about Mr. Foster. He had changed her life, but she hadn't heard from him since the donation had been made. She hadn't expected to hear from him, really. After all, he was a busy man with his own family and his own life. Still, a part of her wondered if there might be more to their brief encounter than just the initial kindness. There was something about him that had intrigued her, something deeper than just his wealth and business success. One afternoon, as Maria was leaving school, she received another call. She almost didn't recognize the number, but then it clicked. It was the same number she had received when Jake had contacted her before. Her heart skipped a beat. "Hello?" she answered, trying to sound casual, though her mind was racing. "Maria, it's Jake again. I hope you're doing well." His voice was as professional and friendly as it had been before. "Mr. Foster wanted me to reach out to you again. He has something he'd like to discuss, and he thought it might be something you'd be interested in." Maria paused for a moment, her curiosity piqued. "Sure, what's this about?" "Well," Jake began, "Mr. Foster has been thinking a lot about your work and the impact it's had on your students. He's been impressed by how much you've done with the resources he's provided. And well, he wants to offer something else." Maria felt a flutter of uncertainty. What could he possibly want now? She had already accepted his help and everything was going well. Why was he reaching out again? "I'm listening," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jake explained that Mr. Foster was planning a new initiative aimed at supporting educators who were making a real difference in their communities. It was something Mr. Foster had been working on in his spare time. A foundation dedicated to providing grants and resources to teachers who showed exceptional dedication to their students. And Mr. Foster wanted Maria to be one of the first people considered for the program. At first, Maria was stunned. She had never considered herself someone who deserved that kind of recognition. She had always thought of her work as a quiet, everyday effort, not something that needed to be celebrated. But here was a man, a successful businessman who had not only noticed her efforts but also believed in them enough to create an entire initiative to support people like her. "What do you need from me?" Maria asked, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "We'd love to meet with you," Jake said. "Mr. Foster would like to discuss the details with you in person. It's a chance to learn more about your vision for your students and how the foundation can support you further." Maria didn't hesitate for long. She agreed to meet, though she felt a bit unsure of what to expect. She hadn't seen Mr. Foster since that flight, and though their conversation had been meaningful, this felt like a whole new chapter in the story they had started. What could he possibly see in her work that would warrant such an initiative? And why her, of all people? The meeting was scheduled for the following week, and Maria spent the days leading up to it in a mix of excitement and nervousness. She wasn't sure what she was walking into, but she knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't afford to overlook. When the day arrived, Maria dressed simply but neatly, her usual style. She wasn't one to dress up in expensive clothes or try to impress others with her appearance. She wanted to be herself, and that meant wearing something comfortable but respectful. She didn't want to be seen as someone who was there for the wrong reasons. She was just a teacher, someone who loved her job and wanted to make a difference. The meeting took place in a sleek, modern office building in the city. Maria had never been in a place like it. The building was immaculate, with tall windows and minimalist decor. She was escorted into a conference room where Mr. Foster was waiting. He stood up when she entered, offering her a warm smile and extending his hand. "Maria, it's great to see you again. I hope you've been well." Maria shook his hand, trying not to feel out of place. "It's good to see you too. Thank you for meeting with me." After exchanging pleasantries, they sat down, and the conversation quickly turned to the reason for the meeting. Mr. Foster began by explaining the vision behind the foundation he had created. It was more than just about money or resources. It was about creating a network of educators who could support each other and make an even bigger impact on their communities. "We believe in your potential, Maria," Mr. Foster said, his voice steady but passionate. "Your work has already made a real difference, but we also know that there's so much more you can do. The foundation wants to help you reach more students, expand your influence, and provide you with the tools and opportunities to take your work to the next level." Maria felt a wave of emotions wash over her. She hadn't expected this at all. The idea of being part of something so much bigger than her small-town classroom was both humbling and exciting. She had always dreamed of making a difference, but never imagined that her efforts would catch the attention of someone with such resources and vision. "Thank you," Maria said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't even know what to say." "I never thought something like this could happen," Mr. Foster smiled kindly. "You've already done the hard part, Maria. You've shown that you care deeply about your students and that you're willing to go above and beyond for them. Now it's about supporting you so that you can do even more." They spent the next hour discussing the details of the Foundation's initiative. Maria learned that she would be given a substantial grant to further her work, as well as access to a network of other teachers, mentors, and resources. She would also be able to attend workshops and conferences designed to help educators like her develop new strategies for teaching and learning. As the meeting came to a close, Mr. Foster extended his hand once more. "I'm excited for what's to come, Maria. I truly believe you have the potential to change lives, and we want to be a part of that journey." Maria shook his hand. Still processing everything that had just happened, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something incredible. It wasn't just the financial support, it was the opportunity to grow, to learn, and to connect with other like-minded individuals who shared her passion for education. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more confidence. "I'm honored by this opportunity, and I promise I'll make the most of it." As Maria left the meeting, she felt a sense of gratitude and excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Her work had always been fulfilling, but now, with this new support, it felt like her dream was finally within reach. She had no idea where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer alone in her mission. There were people who believed in her, who saw her potential, and who wanted to help her make a lasting impact on the world. And as she walked back to her car, Maria couldn't help but feel a deep sense of purpose, knowing that she had not only made a difference in her students' lives, but had also created a ripple effect that would continue to grow, touching the lives of countless others in the years to come. Months passed, and Maria's life continued to evolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her work in the classroom had become even more fulfilling with the support of Mr. Foster's foundation. The grant she had received allowed her to purchase new learning materials, set up a better learning environment, and create programs that encouraged her students to take ownership of their learning. Her classroom, once a simple space filled with the basics, was now a vibrant, dynamic place where children thrived. With the new resources, Maria was able to introduce interactive lessons that excited her students. There were group projects, hands-on activities, and even field trips that brought the lessons to life. She had always believed that learning should be fun, but now, with the foundation's support, she was able to turn that belief into reality. Her students were more engaged than ever before, and Maria found herself inspired by their growth and progress. But it wasn't just the classroom that was changing. Maria had started to feel more confident in her abilities as an educator. The workshops and conferences she attended through the foundation gave her new tools and ideas, but they also gave her a sense of belonging. She wasn't just a teacher in a small town anymore. She was part of a larger community of educators who shared her passion and drive. This sense of connection made all the difference. She no longer felt isolated in her work. She felt supported, and that made her more determined than ever to make a lasting impact on her students' lives. However, as her professional life flourished, Maria began to notice something else. Her personal life had taken a back seat. She had always been dedicated to her work, but now it felt like there was even less time for anything else. Friends and family had begun to comment on how often she seemed to be working, and how rarely they saw her outside of school hours. Maria had never been someone to seek out a social life, but the quiet comments from those who cared about her began to make her think. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, Maria sat in her living room, sipping tea and reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. Her thoughts kept circling back to Mr. Foster. He had given her so much: resources, opportunities, and even his belief in her work. But she hadn't heard from him in a while. She had been so focused on her students, on making the most of everything he had provided, that she hadn't thought about the man who had made it all possible. She realized that she hadn't even sent him a proper thank you note for the continued support. After everything he had done for her, she felt guilty that she hadn't reached out to express her appreciation. That night, Maria sat at her desk and began to write. Her pen moved slowly across the page as she carefully composed her words. She wrote about the changes she had seen in her students, how their confidence had grown, and how much the resources had helped her bring her teaching to life. She also thanked him for believing in her when she hadn't believed in herself, and for giving her the chance to do what she loved on a bigger scale. As she finished the letter, Maria felt a sense of peace. She didn't know if Mr. Foster would even read it, but sending it made her feel like she was acknowledging something important. She wasn't just grateful for the donations and the grant. She was grateful for the encouragement, the trust, and the belief he had shown in her work. It was that belief that had given her the strength to believe in herself. The next day after school, Maria sent the letter. She didn't expect an immediate response, but as the days passed, she found herself wondering what had become of Mr. Foster. Had he moved on to other projects? Was he still thinking about his foundation? She didn't know, but her curiosity got the best of her. A week later, as she was preparing for class, her phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was familiar. "Maria," Jake said warmly, "it's good to hear from you. Mr. Foster got your letter, and he wanted me to reach out and thank you. He's been thinking a lot about you and your work, and he'd like to meet with you again." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this, but she was thrilled to hear from him again. "I didn't think he'd have the time," she said, her voice surprised but grateful. "Mr. Foster is always happy to connect with people who are making a difference," Jake explained. "He wants to meet with you to discuss something new, something that could take your work even further." Maria felt a mix of excitement and nerves. What could this new opportunity be? She had no idea, but she knew that Mr. Foster had already done so much for her, and anything more would be a blessing. They scheduled the meeting for the following week, and Maria spent the days leading up to it trying to keep her nerves in check. She didn't want to get her hopes up too high, but she couldn't help but wonder what Mr. Foster might have in mind. The day of the meeting arrived, and Maria found herself once again in the sleek, modern office building. As she walked into the conference room, she was greeted by Mr. Foster with a warm smile and a handshake. "Maria, it's good to see you again," he said, his voice kind. "I've been hearing wonderful things about your work. Your students are lucky to have you." Maria smiled, feeling the familiar sense of humility that had always been a part of her. "Thank you. I've been working hard to make the most of the opportunities you've given me." Mr. Foster nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. It's exactly why we've been thinking about you. You're not just teaching. You're inspiring, and we think you have the potential to inspire even more people." He paused, letting the words sink in. Maria wasn't sure what he meant, but she was eager to hear more. "We want to create a mentorship program," Mr. Foster continued. We believe that your experience, your passion, could help other teachers, especially those who are just starting out. There are so many educators who feel isolated, who don't have access to the resources they need. We want you to be part of a program that connects experienced teachers like yourself with those who could benefit from your guidance. Maria's eyes widened. She had never thought of herself as a mentor, but the idea of sharing her experiences with others was something she couldn't ignore. It felt like a natural extension of her work, a way to help even more people, teachers and students alike. I'd be honored to be part of that, she said, her voice filled with excitement. I've always believed that teaching is about collaboration. The more we share, the more we grow. Mr. Foster smiled, clearly pleased with her response. That's exactly the attitude we're looking for. We want to build a network of teachers who support each other, who learn from each other. And I think you could be a key part of that network.